At 18 hours GMT, welcome to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. I'm Alex Hudson. 10 on the typhoon scale. Typhoon Mangkhut lashes China's most popular province of Guangdong after killing dozens of people in the Philippines. Local elections are taking place in the two-thirds of Syria controlled by the government. One of President Putin's chief critics, Pyotr Verzilov of the Pussy Riot protest group, is in hospital. His supporters say he's been poisoned. China accuses Taiwan of spying activities. An aspirin a day isn't good for older people after all, according to the latest study. And Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge has run the world's fastest ever marathon in Berlin.
I really feel happy. I feel great. 2 hours, 1 minute and 7 seconds.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, live from London.
Hello, I'm Marion Marshall with the BBC News. Typhoon Mangkhut is lashing China's most populous province of Guangdong, bringing heavy rain and winds of 160 kilometers per hour. State media said the typhoon made landfall near the coastal city of Zhengmen. Earlier, the storm passed close to Hong Kong. Michael Bristow reports. The typhoon has now arrived in southern China, where more than 2.5 million people have been evacuated. Tourist spots have been closed and construction sites shut down. Ships have been called back into harbour. Dramatic video caught the moment scaffolding fell from a skyscraper in Hong Kong. Other footage showed people being blown off their feet. Roofs were torn from buildings and trees uprooted or snapped in two. While the casinos in Macau, the world's biggest gambling destination, were shut down for the first time ever. The authorities in North Carolina in the United States say floods, triggered by record amounts of rain from a tropical storm, are continuing to cause chaos. Hundreds of people have been rescued and thousands are still in emergency shelters or without power. Officials warn that the heavy rainfall will cause more flash floods and lead to rising water levels in the coming days. Neighbouring South Carolina was also badly hit by Storm Florence. 14 people across the two states are now known to have died. The UN's Middle East peace envoy has warned Israel not to carry out what's expected to be the imminent demolition of a Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank. Nikolai Mladenov said the destruction of Khan al-Ahmar would breach international law and could undermine efforts to eventually establish a viable Palestinian state in the West Bank. Israel says the village was built without permission and arrangements have been made to move its residents to a better, safer site. A Saudi-led coalition airstrike is reported to have hit a radio station in the Yemeni port of Hodeidah. The Houthi rebels who hold the city say 4 civilians were killed. But the coalition said the building was used as a rebel command center, making it a legitimate target. Yemen's government and its Saudi-led coalition allies have launched a major offensive to try to recapture Hodeidah. A major study into the use of aspirin has found that healthy, elderly people don't benefit from taking low daily doses of the drug as a preventative measure. James Gallagher has more details.
People are prescribed aspirin after a heart attack or stroke because the drug thins the blood to reduce the chance of another one. But the researchers at Monash University said millions of completely healthy, elderly people take a daily aspirin too. The trial looked at more than 19,000 healthy people over 70 years old for 5 years. The results, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed a daily dose did not reduce heart problems, yet it increased the risk of dying from cancer and of having major stomach bleeds. The researchers said there was no overall benefit in the elderly if they were in good health.
BBC News. The leaders of Ethiopia and Eritrea have signed a peace accord witnessed by the Saudi monarch King Salman in the port city of Jeddah. The terms of the agreement haven't been made public. It comes 2 months after Eritrea's president, Isaias Afwerki, and the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed signed a declaration of peace, ending 2 decades of enmity. Officials in the United States say residents of 3 areas hit by a series of fires and gas explosions north of Boston in Massachusetts have started to return home. At least 1 person died and others were injured in the blasts on Thursday. The governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, said all affected homes and buildings had been cleared of gas. France's hard-right leader, Marine Le Pen, has launched a fierce attack on President Emmanuel Macron's policies at her party's conference and described him as worn out, weakened and ineffectual. Ms. Le Pen's party, formerly known as the National Front, has been renamed the National Rally. Hugh Schofield is in Paris.
It's been a tough year for Marine Le Pen after her defeat by Emmanuel Macron at the presidential elections. But this week was her way of saying she's back, buoyed by a surprise opinion poll last week which shows her National Rally party at level pegging with the president's La République En Marche and well ahead of any other opposition. She can also point to the rise of other hard-right parties in Europe as an omen of good promise. Today, her targets were Macron and Brussels, and she returned with force to the hard-right central theme of immigration. There was never money to alleviate poverty among the French, she said, but a bottomless well for helping immigrants.
The French athlete Kevin Mayer has set a new world record for the decathlon. Competing at Toulouse, France, he surpassed the previous record holder, Ashton Eaton of the United States, who beat him to the gold medal at the Rio Olympics. The decathlon involves competing in 10 different disciplines over 2 days. BBC News.
You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Alex Ritson. We start in East Asia, where Typhoon Mangkhut continues to pummel mainland China, having passed over the Philippines and Hong Kong. Almost 2.5 million people have been relocated, and authorities in China have issued their highest warning, a red alert. In Guangdong, the country's most popular province, people have been warned to stay inside their homes as skyscrapers sway in the 160 km/h winds. Dozens of people have died in the Philippines and hundreds have been left injured in Hong Kong. Our correspondent Robin Branch reports from Hong Kong. This was a monster typhoon that hit 3 places in 3 days. Hong Kong was in the middle. More than 100 people here have been injured, but no deaths have been reported. The biggest casualties are shattered windows and fallen trees. Dozens of roads were blocked. There's some flooding in lower-lying areas as well. This is obviously not what Sunday evening in one of the main streets in central Hong Kong is supposed to look like. There is rubbish everywhere. We've got about half a metre of flooding there as well. The worst of the winds have passed, but there's a big clean-up operation that needs to happen. People still being urged to stay indoors. It wasn't a direct hit, and the worst has passed. But the rain is falling, and there's a landslide warning in place. It's still dangerous to be out.
I'm here to feel the strength of the typhoon. It's quite strong.
In the Philippines, it was more serious. The death toll there is rising. The damage more widespread in smaller communities in a country less able to protect its people. In a flooded home, rescuers found a mother and child stranded. Both were saved. The child passed first to safety. Here too, though, there is now the threat of landslide. Mangkhut has now made landfall in mainland China, hitting Guangdong province, the final stop on its devastating westerly journey. Thousands had already been evacuated there. They'll know the full extent of the damage once Monday comes. Robin Brandt, meanwhile, in the US, Storm Florence, now downgraded from a hurricane to a depression, continues to dump what's being described as epic amounts of rain along the eastern seaboard. Roy Cooper is the governor of North Carolina, the worst affected region. He said the risk to life is rising.
As this storm continues to churn through North Carolina, it has dumped nearly 2 feet or more of rain in many places. The strongest storm bands are dumping 2 to 3 inches of rain per hour. That's enough to cause flooding in areas that have never flooded before. The risk is growing as well in the mountains, where rains could lead to dangerous landslides.
More than 1,000 first responders are undertaking evacuations by boat from flooded areas, and as wind speeds drop, aerial rescues are taking place too. 10 mass feeding stations have been established for people who've had to leave their homes. Let's cross to our correspondent, Chris Buckler. Chris, what's the latest? Yeah, the wind has died down, but the rain is continuing to fall around me, and that is a real worry here, because flooding is causing a huge amount of problems, particularly inland. The focus, of course, earlier in the week was at the coast. Now it is very much about Hurricane Florence moving slightly west and really dumping that huge amount of rainfall. But there are still hundreds of thousands of households without electricity, and that is causing its own problems, because areas are cut off as it is because of the flooding. And I'm standing at one of the few filling stations that is open in this area, and I can tell you the queue stretches right the way down the road, up another road, and further still. There are about 400 cars in this queue to get petrol, and it's taking about 3 hours for people to actually get that. And that's important because they're not just using the fuel for their cars to try and get around, but also for power generators, because they have been living without electricity. Chris, what else have you seen since you arrived? Well, I've got to say, you know, when you take a look around here, you just see huge amounts of trees that have fallen. Of course, sometimes with deadly consequences. But it is the flooding that is really starting to show. There are roads that are blocked off. It's very difficult to get out of this area for the minute. We have had some colleagues who have tried to get out of Wilmington today, and they've had to turn back because of the amount of rain that's on the roads. People are being pretty resilient, although there is a great deal of frustration. I've even seen fights in this petrol queue today. Some people crying because they didn't think that they would be able to get petrol. It is really the frustration of this storm, and that's partly because they don't see an end to it yet as this rain continues to fall. Chris, stay safe. Chris Buckler in North Carolina. Almost 7 years since the start of the conflict in Syria, the government is holding local elections. Some 6,050 voting centres opened early in the morning in government-controlled areas, which covers about 2/3 of the country. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston is with me here. Alan, what do we make of these elections?
Well, as you know, the Syrian government doesn't tolerate any serious challenge. It poured all its energy into crushing those who rose up against it in 2011. Many dissidents have disappeared into Syria's jails, and many have been killed. So when we think about elections in Syria, we have to bear in mind that very bleak background. Some of those candidates today will have been independent figures, but many will have been linked in some way to the ruling establishments, and they'll have been standing in places from which many people who might oppose the authorities will have fled. They'll be refugees now. So these local elections aren't going to make any great difference, but the fact that they've taken place sends a signal. The government is saying to its people and the world that as the war winds down, a degree of normality is being reimposed, a degree of business as usual. That important network of councils across the country is having new life breathed into it. The old Syria is reviving itself, if you like.
Okay, that's the government argument, but there is still fighting going on, especially around Idlib. What's happening there?
The government is winning this war with help of the Russians and the Syrians, and it now has its eyes set on the province of Idlib in the north of the country. It'll go after a mix of rebel groups there, one particularly powerful jihadi group linked to Al-Qaeda, but these fighters are in among millions of civilians, and Turkey is particularly worried that if there's a major battle in Idlib, hundreds of thousands of people may try to cross the border into Turkey, and the Turks have been working hard behind the scenes to try to head off that possible offensive. And there's an important meeting tomorrow between the President of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan, and his Russian counterpart, Mr. Putin, in the Russian town of Sochi, and Idlib will be at the center of the agenda there. But tonight, many people in Idlib will be holding their breath, just hoping that diplomacy can head off the worst, head off that possible government offensive in the province.
Alan, thank you. Our Middle East analyst, Alan Johnston. You're listening to the BBC World Service. Marianne has the headlines.
Asia's strongest typhoon this year has hit China's most populous province of Guangdong after causing devastation in the Philippines. Local elections are being held in government-controlled areas of Syria as President Assad tries to display a return to normality after 8 years of war. And in Berlin, the Kenyan long-distance runner Eliud Kipchoge has run the fastest ever marathon.
To China now, where Beijing has today warned Taiwan to stop spying activities against its big